Hello. Let me see again, right? So it's as I said, it is very nice having you. Today we will be discussing the post-war emigration and Polish citizenship by descent. If you are interested in Polish citizenship by descent in general, we have already done several of the webinars already that tackle the same issue in previous periods. So I strongly advise to check it out. We have discussed the earliest emigration, and we have discussed the emigration during the war, the wartime. And today we will discuss the post-war emigration and how it connected with citizenship and how you can still claim your Polish citizenship even after all this time. So you can see here in our timeline that we'll be discussing a period of roughly 45 years from just after the war up to 1990s. And as always, we will answer all your questions at the end of our presentation, and the ones that we won't be able to answer in the time that we have for the webinar, please do not worry, as we will be discussing them later on. We will be replying to you by email or in the Facebook chat and any other method. So your question will not go unanswered. So let's just get right to it. We will be starting with quick description of what we do. As I mentioned, Your Roots in Poland is a firm that deals with genealogy and citizenship. So if you are interested in exploring your Polish heritage, please do not hesitate to contact us. Here you have our email. You can write an email and describe your case, and we will provide you with free analysis. Or you can just send in the survey in which you answer quick questions that will enable us to analyze your case as well. So starting from 1945, we have thousands of displaced people, both doing of Nazi Germany and Soviet Russia. Those two regimes work very hard to displace Polish people, either in Russia's case to the east, further east, Siberia and other inhospitable regions. And as to Germany, they mostly relocated Poles to work in the in the forced labor. So after the war, the borders changed and Poland moved westward, losing so-called Kresy. So those were the parts that today make Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania, and moved westward as we received Silesia, Warmia, Mazuria, and Pomerania in exchange. And also many Poles chose not to come back to the motherland. They chose to stay in the West, as they knew well that Poland is now a puppet state of the Soviet Union, and many of them could even fear for their life given their past, for example, fighting the Bolshevik War or just being anti-communist. So the citizenship law at this time is still the pre-war one. So this is the citizenship law that was established in 1920, and even up to 1951 it was not changed. So communist regime still followed the citizenship rule book guided by the previous authorities. So as I mentioned, we have discussed the 1920 law in our previous webinar, but if you would be having some questions about it today, please do not worry, and we will answer those accordingly. Some of you could have ancestors from a very interesting state. It was a free state of Danzig, today Gdańsk. It was neither part of Poland or part of Germany up to 1939. So if you have such a case that your ancestor hailed from Gdańsk before the war, you could be interested that the issue was only resolved in 1947, and to speak in general terms, the ancestor, if he or she wanted to preserve Polish citizenship, he or she had to swear allegiance to the Polish state and just remain in Poland. So the ones that left for Germany lost their Polish citizenship, even if they had one. And you can see at the map not only the Free State of Gdańsk, which is marked in dark purple, but also the borders change that I've mentioned earlier. So the dark orange or dark pink part here are the Kresy, so the parts of Poland that became USSR, and then after USSR's collapse, Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania. And in light purple, you can see the lands that were granted to Polish state. So if your ancestors came from the light purple lands and it was before the war, they most likely did not have Polish citizenship in the first place, as they had German citizenship. But there are, of course, some exceptions. If we can prove that the ancestor lived in those parts under Germany but had Polish passport and felt Polish, then of course we could proceed. But in general, those parts became part of Poland only after 1945. And of course, the borders change, as mentioned, caused a lot of inflow or in general emigration to Poland. So let's move on to the next chapter. So I wanted to discuss also the ethnic issues. Here you have the map of ethnic portions of Second Polish Republic, so the states that existed before Second World War. In red you have Poles, ethnic Poles. In blue you have Germans. In purple you have mixed Polish-German heritage. In yellow you have Ukrainians. In green you have Belarusians, and in brown you have mixed Polish-Belarusian ethnicity. So as you can see, Poland was very diverse, and what I always want to specify that all those people were Polish citizens. So Polish citizenship was not only granted to Polish ethnicity, I mean Poles by ethnicity, but also Poles of different ethnicities and faiths. And of course, here on the map, you do not have, I believe, you do not have Jewish portion of the populace, but they were, of course, a lot of Jews lived in pre-war Poland. So after the war, Polish state and Soviets in general tried to unify the states in the sense of the nation. So either the Ukrainians left for Ukraine, or they were displaced to the newly gained territories, so Silesia and Pomerania, so the places that they or their ancestors never been to. And it was done so to loosen their connection to Ukrainian or Ruthenian culture, and that way to Polonize them. And as to Germans, they mostly left for Germany, either East or West Germany, and by later decisions of the citizenship and citizenship treaties between Eastern Bloc countries, they lost their Polish citizenship in the process. As to Jews, the ones that survived the Second World War were mostly accepted, but only up to around 1956, when the Stalinist regime ended with the death of Stalin and change of authorities on the communist highest councils. And then they started to change their policies against Jews, and again to persecute them and to force them to leave Poland. Then we have repatriation. So it's from Latin, from patria, that means motherland. So it's a process in which a person comes back to the country to settle for permanent stay. And after First World War, it was also a common thing for Poles all over the world to come to Second Polish Republic and settle and gain citizenship in the process. It was also accepted after Second World War, given how many Poles were outside of borders, even speaking the new borders. It first had to be approved mostly for the petitions from the eastern Poland that now was Soviet Union. But if approved, if the person came to Poland, he or she was granted with citizenship. So yeah, as it states here, it was mostly for Poles living in Kresy in the eastern Poland from the Second Polish Republic. But some of Poles came also from the West, from displaced people camps, or from the Polish forces in Great Britain. And they were also granted citizenship, but they were also most of the time monitored by new authorities because they feared Western spies, so to speak. So all of the records regarding this process, the repatriation process, are held by Państwowy Urząd Repatriacyjny, and the documents still exist today, and they are in rather good shape. So it is a valuable source for those times. If you have a case in which your ancestor came back to Poland or came to Poland for the very first time, as in my wife's grandfather's case, because he was born in France and lived there all his life, and then he came to Poland and settled here. And yeah, so those are some valuable sources. Here you have an example of such a document. It's a pass given by Państwowy Urząd Repatriacyjny to one. I have blacked out the personal data given the data privacy, but to one Polish citizen for not only settling in Poland, but also for free travel by train to Warsaw. And speaking of sources, in general, sources for this brief period, so just after the war, up to 1950s, sadly, the sources are rather scarce. Because we no longer can use the domicile records or population censuses as a proof of citizenship. Previously, being registered as inhabitant of Poland meant basically you were a citizen. After the war, it's not equal. The passport files start at roughly 1947. In theory, they started just after the war, just after the communist regime started operating. But frankly, I never seen emigration file, the passport file, from earlier than 1947. So you can take this with a grain of salt. But overall, for later periods, the passport files are a great source. We will discuss it in detail later on. I just wanted to outline that it starts roughly at the time. And the biggest help, of course, are Bad Arolsen archives, formerly called International Tracing Services. They registered all displaced people after the war, or people that were persecuted by Nazi Germany. So we also have sources from Polish government in exile. We also done a webinar on that topic. It was previous webinar. We have discussed in detail the source of Polish forces under British command. Very good source, military records held still in the UK. And we invite you, of course, to check it out. All our webinars are recorded and then put to YouTube, so you can just type youtube.com and then Your Roots in Poland, and you will find our webinar. And also we have some consular passports, because before great powers decided that Polish government is the one set up by Soviets, we had a Polish government in exile during the war, and they issued passports. So here you have such consular passport. issued for Jan Karski. He was a famous Polish hero that reported to the West powers what was going on in the occupied Poland. Especially, he let them know about the Holocaust. Consular passports are, of course, good source, but I wrote here that be careful because the basis of consular passport was different at the time. So the provincial office, when now sees consular passport and analyzes your case, reviews it, they can state that the consular passport's basis is not sufficient because, for example, consul could write, passport was issued because this person spoke Polish, or this person had 2 witnesses with them and they said he or she was Polish. The stronger the basis is for the passport, the better, but it's best to check it before posting to provincial office. So here's from the close-up, the passport of Jan Karski, diplomatic courier. Yeah, to go in detail on the bad arrows and files, which I have outlined previously, here you can have this helpful link. A lot of files are already digitalized and available online. It's a great source. I strongly recommend it because if you, for example, if you know only the date of birth of your ancestor or only name or surname and do not know the place of birth, which is very important for doing searches here in Poland, you can try typing his or her name and surname and check if they were registered in displaced people's camp. And as you can see on the card here, I will also zoom it. Okay. You have full details about this person, even his or her faith, names of parents, last profession before being in displaced person camp. So this one was a clerk at the railways. Last permanent residence as of 1938. The languages that he or she spoke, and other remarks. We do not have remarks here, but if that person had a family, wife or husband or children, they would be noted here. So coming back to the general facts about it, as I mentioned, it confirms mostly persecution from the Nazi regime or just the fact that person was displaced, because person could have this sort of documentation even if they were not in Germany during the war, but they heard news that communists are approaching and they just fled to the West. So never persecuted, never forced labor, but a displaced person. Yeah, very helpful source. And as mentioned, passport files starting from 45, from my experience, 47, up to 1990s when the communist regime fell and the in and out movement of country was no longer recorded. This source is very valuable and it's held by the Institute of National Remembrance. So first, red flag, it's not held by the state archives or city archives, it's held by a special institution that has judicial powers. And as such, those files are classified. They are not for open viewing. In order for us to apply for those, we would need a power of attorney from you, and we would need to prove our legal interest. So the legal interest is applying for Polish citizenship, and it works perfectly fine. But if you would like to explore such file for genealogical purposes or just even of curiosity, you have to make sure either to have a legal basis to ask for those files, or to prove that you are directly descended and by showing birth certificates or death certificates to prove the lineage. And most of the cases, the file would still be reviewed by the employee of the Institute of National Remembrance and not genealogist or yourself, because the fonts in which the passport files are kept are classified. But even if it's a pain to access, the files are just priceless because they have a lot, and I mean a lot of personal details, including letters, including photographs, including other documents, so birth certificates, marriage certificates, all attached to the passport file. Because you can imagine how the process went. So the person tried to either stating that he or she want to leave Poland for good and to establish himself or herself in the West, or the light that they are just going for a trip to visit uncle or aunt and never came back, but the communist regime still kept an eye on them. So in order to apply, you had to have, for example, letters of recommendation. You had to state that you have no delayed payments of taxes, that you are giving up your apartment, that you are that you have all the matters solved. So if you have children, that you have your spouse's permission to take the children with you. So a lot of documentation, visas from other countries, the tickets for ship or plane. So it's very interesting to see how it went, and most of the cases also the authorities did not allow for the person to leave, and it was only done on third or fourth try. And you have those letters that they write to authorities stating, please, good sirs, allow me to leave. I am the only person left from my family that survived Second World War. I want to reconnect with my other relatives living in Brazil or Israel, and so on and so on. So a lot of personal data and details that are worth getting. So here we have a close-up. I also blacked out the private parts. So you have here the date and place of birth. You have a marital status. You have where the person is employed. Even the details about the person, so height, so shape of face, color of eyes. So as you can see, a lot of details. And whether they have any property or what is their nationality apart of from citizenship, what is the purpose of them leaving the country, were they even persecuted, and so on and so on. Prosecuted, sorry. Okay, so we're done with 1945. Let's move to 1951. Very important date because we have a major overhaul of the citizenship rules. So we have a new citizenship law that changed basically everything because now service in the army or holding a public office outside of Poland no longer costs loss of citizenship. Naturalization, so obtaining other citizenship than Polish, also after that date has no impact whatsoever. Women had their own citizenship right because it was not so sure back then. In 1920, women's citizenship mostly depended on their father's or husband's one, and only in 1951 they had their own citizenship that even marriage could not change. And birth and wedlock no longer required to was no longer required to pass citizenship to children. So father didn't have to acknowledge the child, but it's only for part of time. So please bear with me. And the authorities also wanted to tackle the dual citizenship, mostly with other Eastern Bloc countries, because they had no real option to negotiate a treaty with Western countries, and so they mostly did it between themselves. Sorry. So it was very hard to lose citizenship, the Polish citizenship, compared to previous citizenship law. It mostly happened as a political cause, and it had to happen from Rada Państwa, which was the highest office. And as I mentioned previously, with the changes of populace, so exposed Germans, moved Ukrainians, Lithuanians, Belarusians, the law confirmed that those people that left Poland on the basis of those relocations were no longer entitled for Polish citizenship, with minor exceptions. The minor exceptions are mostly for mixed families. So if you have ancestry that is mixed, part German, part Polish, or part Ukrainian, part Polish, please inquire with us. We will let you know whether you have a case or not, because the law specified that with mixed marriage there is a possibility to retain Polish citizenship. And Poles that lived in the East, so again in Kresy, but also in other parts of Soviet Union, that chose or were not allowed to repatriate, were now treated as Soviet citizens. And we will discuss the cutoff date in detail in just about a minute. So here we have the Convention on Dual Citizenship with the USSR. It was signed in 1958, and its real cutoff date for 1959. Why 1959? We will get to that as well. Here you have the map of the light pink are Kresy, and the red circles are Poles being relocated to deep into the USSR. Those who could repatriated to Poland, but some of them were not allowed to, or previously left with the Anders Army to West through Iran, but it was also the topic of our previous webinar. But if somebody did not repatriate up to 1958, that was the time that the convention was signed between Poland and USSR, and it provided this rule that Poles living in the USSR and also Russians living in Poland had 1 year to choose their citizenship. So they could not be both Polish and Soviet subjects. They had to choose their citizenship. But here's the trick. In Soviet Union, nobody told Polish people that they have to choose. So it was kept a secret. And as such, when the time passed and 1 year passed from the convention, by default, the citizenship chosen was Soviet. So if somebody did not learn about this convention somehow and went straight to the consulate and reported as Polish and asked to be treated as Polish, which is hard to imagine given the conditions in the Soviet Union back then they became Soviet only. And why they had Soviet citizenship in the first place? Because when Soviet Union attacked Poland in 1939 and occupied Kresy, Stalin gave Soviet citizenship to all inhabitants of those lands. And it was not a matter to be discussed. They had to accept it. And it's very, very harmful. I'm providing you now with my personal opinion on the subject, because first of all, the people were in no position to reject this Soviet citizenship. Then the convention signed in 1958 was not ratified by Polish Sejm, and it was not made public in the USSR, as I mentioned. So it basically should be void because it lacked the full legal process to become to be grounded in the legal matters both in Poland and USSR. But sadly, I have to say that it's still respected. So the provincial office, when it makes decision for people that hail from the then Soviet Union, now Ukraine, Belarus, and Lithuania, they do not accept such cases and they reject citizenship application altogether because they are stating your ancestor lost Polish citizenship in 1959 due to Polish Soviet Convention. Here you have map in close. So all red dots or circles are Polish communities that were displaced from Poland. And we also had two conventions with other Eastern Bloc countries. We had a convention with Czechoslovakia that is still also valid from 1965. It also had given the opportunity to choose the citizenship, also for the newly born children from mixed couples, but they did not specify any time limit, and same goes for Hungary. The convention was signed in 1961. Okay, so moving on to the next date, we have 1952 and introduction of a mandatory ID in Poland. So what's the deal? Didn't Poles had IDs before that? Well, some of them did, some of them didn't. It was present before the war as well, but not mandatory. So you can imagine that some people had IDs, mostly if they moved around places, especially if they left for other countries, because then they had this ID together with passport. But in 1952, it was made mandatory to have an ID, and it's still up to this day. So historic IDs, even up to 1990s, are held in Warsaw's archive, the branch in Milanówek. Milanówek is a separate town in Poland. It's in close proximity to Warsaw, and Warsaw archives have this branch in Milanówek that stores a lot of documentation concerning not only IDs but also employee files and so on and so on. But the metryczka dowodowa, which is the proper name for ID in Polish, are also held by local archives and city archives. So if you have no luck in Milanówek, you can still try collections locally. Sadly, Krakow's one went out with a bang, I would say, in a fire that took place in city archive last year. It's a great loss. We have lost a lot of very good documents from Krakow, so also IDs of Stanisław Lem, famous Pole, and I believe Wisława Szymborska too. So it was a great loss. I wish that all of those IDs would also be transferred to Milanówek when there was still time, or even digitalized, but they were not. And just to conclude the ID, it is a very solid proof of citizenship. As you can imagine, the citizenship is stated just by the fact that one was issued an ID, but it also states what is the citizenship. Moving on to the next important date, we have 1962 law. So in 1962, the citizenship law was updated, but there were just minor changes. The one change that we have to discuss and was rather important, it's that it brought back the requirement of wedlock in paternal lineage. What does it mean? So if you have a mixed marriage and only father is Polish, in order for child to inherit Polish citizenship is to be acknowledged by father. So by default, it is done just by the fact that child's parents are married, and that the child is born after marriage. It suffices as proof of paternity. But if it's not the case, we need a proof that father accepted paternity up to 1 year from birth. It's very important, because even if it happens after 1 year, it's no longer accepted by the authorities as a means to pass citizenship to the child. And in such case, child would only have citizenship of mother. And if mother is not Polish, then sadly it's end of the road. If you have both father and mother Polish, then you do not really have to worry about the wedlock requirement, because you can still prove that you inherit citizenship from mother's side. And you have here the Latin sentence mater semper certa est, which means mother is always certain. So nobody claims that you are not your mother's child. So the next big date is 1968, and not for citizenship changes, but rather for historic background and political issues. Because in 1968, a lot of social disruption and protests and changes in the society. So I just wanted still to remind that political reasons were still the #1 cause for stripping the citizenship or for the person to renounce citizenship, because you had those cases in which somebody was feeling very Polish, so having Polish heritage, and didn't even accepting other citizenship for a long time. But when they wanted to visit communist Poland, so Polish People's Republic, they most of the cases were doing such a thing that they renounced Polish citizenship, adopted British or US citizenship or any other citizenship, just not to be treated as Polish subjects, so they would not be held in prison or arrested or subject to a trial in the court, because they wanted to feel protected by their Western citizenship. So if you have a Pole that lived in Second Polish Republic, fought in the Polish forces under British command, and then remained in the UK because they didn't want to come back to communist Poland, but in the 60s, let's say, or 70s, they wanted to visit just one last time, or they wanted to reconnect with family. Some of the cases they feared for their fate, and they renounced Polish citizenship to be protected by their other citizenship. So this is something to check definitely before submitting your case, and we can also help establishing whether there were some grounds. So the passport files that I mentioned earlier also have the registration of movement of Polish expatriates, so people that didn't really have Polish citizenship anymore, but they came to Poland, and they are called Akta Osobowe Cudzoziemca, so foreigners personal file, and we can also find those for you, just to make sure. Okay, so what else do we have here? Authorities started encouraging emigration of dissidents in the 1980s. So if you have parents, or I don't think grandparents, but rather parents that left in that period, they could be forced out from Polish People's Republic. For example, they left for South Africa or United States, and communist authorities were just fine to give them passports to make the problem disappear. And as I mentioned with Jews, after 1956, so when the paradigm in the Communist Party started to shift from Stalinist policies to new ones, they were dismissed from the government, and there were, of course, persecutions. And the state started to push them mostly to Israel. And if they left for Israel, they often signed that they renounced Polish citizenship. But if they left in this time period that we know of, that the authorities pushed for their living and pushed for their citizenship renunciation, we can treat this kind of renunciation as forced. And it is very important because forced renunciation is not legal. And we can just state that your ancestor did not renounce Polish citizenship, but only was forced to. And I had a lot of cases for Jewish heritage, Polish Jewish heritage, in which the citizenship was confirmed for descendants of people that were pushed from Poland to, for example, Israel. So you have two photos from the protests, and one in connection to protesting students and political dissidents, and the one for people that were just probably set up by the party to show solidarity with the party as to persecuting Jews. Moving on to the last date on our timeline, contemporary emigrations. First of all, I think what is important here, you have the ID at the top and the passport at the bottom. So those are two most solid and most common, also most common documents that state belonging to Polish citizenship nowadays, because it's rather hard to get any other kind of documentation, mostly of our tightening data privacy policies, not only in Poland but also in European Union. So it's rather hard to get any other kind of documentation from the archives or institutions. We can still query for the historical documents of your later ancestors, but to get, let's say, ID from just 5 years ago, it would be a pickle, even for the Polish citizenship case. So I imagine that for more recent emigrations, it's also more common for families to have documents that could be used for the procedure, because it's easier to have a passport from 5 or 10 years ago than to have a passport from 100 years ago. I also wanted to tackle this myth that PESEL, which is a personal identification number, it serves a similar purpose as social security number, but has less powers. So if your PESEL is stolen, it's not such a big deal as it is with social security number. Of course, it's not good, but it's not terribly bad either. But PESEL does not confirm one is a citizen, because foreigners can also apply for PESEL. That's the short explanation. So somebody that does not hold Polish citizenship can apply for PESEL and can get a PESEL, and such a PESEL would not really differ from Polish citizens' PESEL. So the number that was introduced in 1977 in first electronic database for Polish people is good to have, is good to be used, but it does not confirm citizenship. So general advice: if you have an expired Polish document, it's a good basis to confirm your citizenship. And if it's expired for more than 2 years, I would say it's even necessary to undergo such a procedure, because the Polish state could state that you have renounced citizenship in the meantime. So let's say your passport expired in 2010, and now you want to have it renewed. They could state that in those 10 or 11 years, you could have renounced your citizenship, and they have to check whether it was a case and whether you still are a citizen. So it's just best to renew your documents when they expire, and that way you wouldn't have any problems, or, well, not maybe problems, but delays in getting new documents. So I believe that's it. We didn't have a lot of source material for the period, because it's, apart from the just after post-war, it's not that complicated period. I also wanted to remind you to be sure to contact us at our email inbox, or fill out the survey at survey.yourrootsinpoland.com. And now I believe we can start the Q&A section. Yeah, thank you very much. And I will be more than happy to answer your questions. We just take a sip of water in the meantime. Okay, so how long does the procedure take? In general, the law specifies that it has to be reviewed as any other official business with the government. It has to be resolved in 1 month. Before the pandemics, it was closer to 2 months because there were some delays. But nowadays, sadly, due to government having backlogs on all fronts, I would say, the realistic time for the case to be reviewed is about half a year even. Of course, you could have your case reviewed earlier than that, but it's best to prepare for the longest possible time and just celebrate if it comes earlier than that. If you are a US citizen and granted Polish citizenship, what is the benefit? Okay, so basically, the main benefit is that Polish passport is simultaneously European passport. So with that, you can travel freely within Schengen area, and Schengen area is almost all of European Union. Only very few countries did not sign the agreement. So you can travel through Spain, France, Germany with no controls whatsoever. You also do not have to stay only for your visa period, which is 90 days for European Union. So you can stay longer than that. And as such, as you are treated as European citizen, because that basically means it, you can study in Europe free of charge at most of the universities. You can work without further permits and getting the paperwork, and you can avoid queues at the airports because we have a separate line for European citizens when departing or arriving. So just being European citizen, basically. Do you have a representative in Poland to submit the application? So can you give an idea of charges? Okay, so we are as such acting as representatives in Poland. We assist with the procedure A to Z, I would say. So we would first analyze your case. The analysis part is free of charge. We would analyze not only your eligibility for the process, but also documents you have, whether they would suffice for the provincial office or not. We have a lot of experience with that, so we know what works and what doesn't, and we can also let you know what we can do to make the application stronger. And after this point, if you decide to go with us, we would handle everything. So dealing with the government, paying the administrative fees, ordering sworn translations to Polish, because if we want to register, and we have to register, for example, your birth and marriage certificates in Poland, we have to translate your US or UK's or any other country's birth certificates to Polish and register those. We would be also dealing with lawyer if we need some sort of certification. So we are dealing with everything up to the point where we receive a package of documents when you have the Polish citizenship confirmation, so the certificate that the Polish government issues stating you are Polish citizen, Polish birth and marriage certificate, as I mentioned, the forms that are filled in, so PESEL and passport forms, which are required by the consulate, and any other documents needed. And with that, you just go to the consulate and you do not have to deal with all the formalities. They would just need your fingerprints because the passport is biometric one, and to pay a fee for the passport itself. The passport should be ready after 4 to 5 weeks. And as to our own fee, that covers all the process that I have described. Let's say in US dollars, our charge is $1,000. It's paid in 2 installments. So first installment is paid when you decide for the procedure, and the second installment is paid when you receive the citizenship, so you can be absolutely sure that you will be given passport. But even before that, we generally strive to let you know earlier. So when we analyze the case and build the case, we will provide you our estimates at that point. And the installments are even. So if it's $1,000, it's 500 at the start and 500 at the end. And we also provide with family discounts. So if you want to apply with family members, then the fee is cheaper. Would I be subject to pay any Poland taxes? Okay, so we basically had a major overhaul of tax system in Poland starting this 1st of January, and we are still dealing with all the formalities of that. But in general, you are a subject of Polish tax system only if you work or reside in Poland. So if you keep working and residing abroad, you should not be a subject to any taxes in Poland. Also, Poland has a lot of agreements with other countries to avoid double taxation. But if you plan to reside or work in Poland, I would consult with tax lawyer, because at the moment I can say honestly that the system is in such a mess and is so complicated that even natural borns of Poland are having trouble to properly understand it. What are the advantages of getting Polish citizenship? Does it equal EU citizenship too? Okay, so as I mentioned, yes, Polish citizenship equals European citizenship. Even in the last slide, under 1990s, you had the example of Polish passport, and it states Unia Europejska, Rzeczpospolita Polska. So it states European Union, Republic of Poland. It is equal. So there is no such a thing as European passport, but rather member states' passports equal European passport. And what are the advantages? I have also mentioned that mostly accessing the Schengen area, which is a big deal, accessing universities, no more troubles with the paperwork at work if you want to work in the European Union, and so on and so on. Do we have next question? Okay, this one is answered. You can check, of course, our earlier webinars at YouTube, at our YouTube channel. This meeting is recorded as well, and it will be uploaded within a few days to our YouTube channel as well. Do we have any other questions? I'm all yours, so please do not hesitate to ask. If your question came up earlier, because before our Q&A segment, then please do not worry. We will answer your question by email or in separate message. Okay, I think we have two more questions. Do you have information for those whose family came to US earlier than 1940s? Okay, so yeah, we have the information. There are two ways that we can make it work, because as mentioned, we had previous webinars on the topic for previous periods of time. But also, if you do not wish to go back to those webinars, please do not hesitate to write to our email inbox. We have provided the address in the presentation, and it will also be shown and sent after the webinar ends. You can just write an email with your case, and we will just reply to you with our free analysis. And that way, perhaps it will be more personalized and helpful for you. Okay, I see that our email is also posted at the chat, so you can copy it from there. That is citizenship at yourrootsinpoland.com. You can just go straight to our website as well and check it from there. I see that there was a question for people that were displaced, where to find the documents. So for the Soviet displacement, also the Institute of National Remembrance, which is called in Polish Instytut Pamięci Narodowej, they have those little records that Russians passed to Polish authorities in the 1990s and 2000s. So we have some sort of documentation what happened to displaced people that were displaced to the east. And for the west, for the Nazi Germany, I would suggest the Bad Earlson archive, which was discussed in the webinar. And if you find a trail there, you can just order the documents from Bad Earlson archives. Okay, I think that's the end of our question and answer segment. I would again would like to thank you very much for the participation in our event, for your questions and for your interest in the subject. It would be great if you would contact us with your cases or put a survey. It's survey.yourrootsinpoland.com. Or contact us by any other means. So you can just call us, you can write an email, and yeah, that's it. I also wanted to remind you that the analysis part is free of charge, so getting your case analyzed and your documents analyzed would cost you nothing. And after that, we offer great deals and family discounts, and I hope you will be interested in that as well. But it's that for now, and yeah, have a nice evening or day. It's evening here, but it's a good day for you. Thank you very much. Thank you.